Patty Alper, author of Teach to Work. I've been a mentor for the last 18 years, and I'm excited today to talk to Dov Baron on his Leadership and Loyalty show. And I will be speaking about project-based mentoring and how we can bring schools and businesses together to help close the skills gap in America. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series, where today we'll be taking an insider look at: do college graduates have the necessary skills needed to enter into the workforce? And if they don't, what can we as leaders do about it? If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in, we're about to go full Monty. If you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. We are deeply grateful also that Inc. made us the #1 podcast to listen to if you want to be a better leader. So thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. And listen, we always need your help in staying relevant, so please get yourself over to iTunes. Rate, review, and subscribe to the show. That's important stuff. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you are a CEO, someone in the C-suite, a sales leader, entrepreneur, or leader in any capacity, you've likely encountered a college graduate applying for a position that they're highly qualified for on paper, but really not prepared for in the real world. So how do we effectively prepare the next generation for the jobs of tomorrow? Well, stay tuned because you're about to find out. Our guest today is Patty Alper. She is the president of Alper Portfolio Group, a marketing and consulting company. She is also a board member of both the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, also known as N.F.T.E, and US 2020, the White House initiative to build mentorship in STEM careers. She's a trustee of the Alper Family Foundation, has been for the last 18 years. She has a unique approach to philanthropic giving and entrepreneurial mentorship, has been featured in the New York Times, no less, the Huffington Post, the Washington Post, Time, and Philanthropy Magazine. I screwed that word up last time I said it too. Patty Alper is the author of a brand new book, Teach to Work. Here it is. Teach to Work. How a mentor, a mentee, and a project can close the gap close the skills gap in America. I really should do that again, but I won't. Go on, I'll do it again. The book is called Teach to Work: How a Mentor, a Mentee, and a Project Can Close the Skills Gap in America. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Patty Alper.
Yay! A+ for you, Dov. Thank you for the introduction.
It's good to have you here. Thank you for joining us. It's good to have you on. It took a little while for us to get to this, but I'm glad we finally made it because I know you've got a very important message to share. But I'm gonna take it off track for a moment, and I'm gonna say, you talk a lot about kids in school and in university and mentoring them. But let me ask you this: what was something that you hated or at least strongly disliked back when you were in school that today you love? What was something that could be anything that you really didn't like it, but now you really just love it?
In all the research for the book, I was introduced to a woman named Dr. Carol Dweck, who wrote a book called Mindset. Are you familiar with it?
I am indeed.
She talks about the fixed and the growth mindset. And you can't help but question yourself when you read her book.
No.
Like what was it about myself? Hello, what was it about myself way back then that made me want to learn, and what held me back?
Yeah.
What is it that pushes you to try? And I'd have to say, back then I was timid.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. Like, what is the difference? When do you begin to develop that confidence? And how does that push you through? I actually have some theories on that that I think mentorship helps contribute.
Sure.
And I also believe that today, for me as an adult versus what I had as a kid, is you get to own an idea and you make it happen, and it's experiential.
Right.
It's kind of like learning in theory is not so interesting.
No, not at all.
So that would be the shift, I would say.
Cool.
Is really willing to fight through something because it's your idea and you're doing it.
Right.
Big difference.
Well, we're in a very different time. I mean, there are 78 million baby boomers entering retirement age, and it seems that this has left, or is likely to leave, a massive skills gap. So I'm going to put it to you: are we ready? I mean, is our society ready for this skills gap?
No, I don't believe so. In doing my research, I will offer you this. There's a gentleman named Tyler Cowen who wrote a book called The Complacent Class.
Mm-hmm.
And he says America has lost its mojo in the 21st century. And I would attribute that to this, what we're calling a skills gap. And there's lots of scenarios, lots of narratives going around that contribute to the meaning of the skills gap. So let's just look at a couple of those.
Okay.
One is there are no more jobs. They're gone. They're gone overseas. They're gone to competition, globalization. They're gone to automation. We hear that day in and day out.
Yep.
Second, we hear that there are jobs, but there are not skilled workers.
Mm-hmm.
I have many sort of research and reports. 2015 report says 7 in 10 executives face shortages in workers with inadequate skills. The Manufacturers Association by 2025 says they'll have 2 million jobs available that cannot be filled. 3,000 business executives come together every year for the GE Global Innovation Barometer. One of their biggest concerns is, and here we go, the misalignment between education and business needs. So that leads us to the third problem is educators, potentially not conversing, not preparing youth for what are the jobs of the future. And that's a tall order.
Absolutely.
But I think it begins, I've just written a series of 3 articles for an organization called Education Reimagined. And it really got me into the weeds of this exact question.
Right.
Like, what could we do to get educators to sort of open their doors and look beyond their walls and ask business people, what is it you need to help prepare kids? So that college kid that you just described, that somebody hires that has a good resume but doesn't know anything, what could educators be doing to help prepare youth?
Mm-hmm.
I believe one step is to listen, to have interviews and dialogue with their neighboring businesses and talk about where is technology heading and what is teamwork like today.
Yeah, in many ways it seems like we have kept these two worlds very separate. The world of education and colleges and universities, and you come out with some form of degree. And on the other side, is the companies and organizations who need you to come out of university with useful, viable skills. And so it's interesting to me that education has sort of kept the corporate or even the employer separate from them, when in many ways it seems to me, based on, and a lot of it's what I liked about your book and what you talked about, is that the need to encourage the organizations, the companies, the employers to be part of the educational system.
Exactly.
Tell us a little bit more about that, because I think this is a vital point that's been missed.
Well, I don't have all the answers. I have some of my own. I'll give you sort of big picture and then sort of some nuts and bolts.
Sure.
I've had the great opportunity to attend, I highly recommend this, the Aspen Ideas Festival.
Sure.
And while I was there this last summer, I heard speak. This was the most moving speaker I heard. A gentleman named Astro Teller. He is the head of innovation for Google, their division called Moonshots, Moonshots X.
Yeah.
And he described the culture there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've written about this. This is in some of my articles. He talks about creating a culture of raging optimism and scathing paranoia. And he has all kinds of different backgrounds of people come together. And he has 3 mandatory requirements for ideas. There has to be, they will not take on something unless it is an absolutely huge problem, global, that there is a radical solution, and that there is a technological breakthrough. It has to fit those 3 criteria.
Powerful.
And 99% of ideas fail.
Mm-hmm.
But when they fail, he celebrates. He celebrates failure because it means we didn't go down a road we shouldn't have. We didn't waste our time, and let's learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
So I just bring that up because that's a kind of dialogue and a environment that educators could learn from.
Right.
Like having everybody take ownership in a new idea and try that anything is worthy of trying. There are no bad ideas. And that failure is great. It's like such an interesting, different sort of way to look at learning.
But that's again one of those great departures between the two, because in the business world, in all leadership books, I've written about it myself many times, and every great leadership person I know has written about the importance and the power of failure, and recognizing failure and learning from failure and embracing failure and failing forward and all those kinds of things. But the educational system is exactly the opposite. Failure is depressing. It is potentially the end. I mean, kids literally commit suicide because they failed their exams. I mean, so this is what I'm trying to say is, how do we get the educational system, which is in many ways antiquated and in many ways made for an industrial age that we are now beyond, how do we get them to literally embrace failure the way you're talking about it?
So in one of my articles, I wrote these few questions. I'm just going to pose, you're asking the same thing, but it takes it a little further. So what can we do to prepare students for tomorrow's jobs? Whose responsibility is it to bridge this skills gap? What is the new culture of innovation? And can corporations align with educators for better job preparation? And what would that partnership look like? So my experience, my answer is the book. That's my experience is 18 years. And mind you, I don't come from a mentoring background. I actually was a construction entrepreneur. I had a company in the Washington market I was one of the first women in that field, and we were the first to be automated. And so I come from a business background. But as your intro said, we formed a foundation, and I began to think about giving back meaningfully. Mm-hmm. And how do you do that? So I loved the idea, and here's where this whole concept was spawned. I got involved with a nonprofit, which you mentioned, called the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, that teaches teachers how to teach business. But I built this company from nothing. There were 3 of us. I mean, in 3 years, we had 100 management level employees. And, you know, grindstone, blood, sweat, and tears, pitfalls, successes, like a roller coaster.
Sure.
And I thought, my gosh, maybe I have something to offer these kids outside of the teacher. Wouldn't they benefit from hearing from a real person? To hear my foibles and my errors and how I got through. So I actually said I would like to put my money where my mouth is. I want to be a contributor, but I want to step up. And I want to go into the classroom. And that was in 2000. That was in the year 2000. So what I did, I actually created a role for myself that would not interrupt the classroom, that would add value to the kids. They each had to write a business plan. But what I ended up doing with my co-mentor, I brought someone with me. He's much smarter than I am, by the way. He's a Harvard MBA. He's a venture capitalist. He looks at business plans day in and day out. And I have more of a marketing and presentation background. So it was a nice sort of marriage. Anyway, we helped these kids launch companies. So we would come in September and see these shy little kids with kind of beginning inklings of ideas. And by June, they had launched companies. They had plans. They were making profits. They had forecasts. They had a marketing strategy. And they were taking products or services to market.
So how old were these kids at the youngest age?
I'd say the youngest I worked with was maybe 13.
Wow, that's fabulous. Now, I know you have some amazing stories from that of your, quote, I think you call them ducklings. Tell us one of those stories of one of those kids, because you told me a few when we were not on air, some of these kids and how they've gone from an idea or concept all the way to market in a major way. Tell us about that.
It's so hard to pick one because,
Sure.
they're all very dear to me. And by now, I'm still doing it. I probably worked with over 750 kids.
Wow.
It's a lot of kids, 30, 40 kids at a time.
Mm-hmm.
I always like my story of a young man named Khalid because he came to class at 14 and he was moved in late in the year. It was December, so he was way behind. And he's extremely shy and a little overweight and totally uninterested in business. Mm-hmm. And so this is sort of a message to your listeners as well. I have no idea when I go into this class what my experience will be like or what kind of a ripple effect I could have on anybody. That my reason for writing the book is, my God, if I can do this, anybody can do this. But you go in with blind faith. You don't know what your outcomes will be or your return on investment. You go because it's the right thing or it's a good thing and you have something to offer. So come to find out, he was sitting in the back of the class and we were going around the room asking all the kids their business ideas and he wouldn't stand up. Mm-hmm. So I kind of met him after class and said, well, I didn't hear your idea. So we worked with him on developing an idea, and this was it. He liked cookies. he ended up making what he called a New York delicious black and white honey baked cookie. It was this huge cookie. Can you see my hands? I mean, It was, like a moon pie. And he made it with honey instead of sugar, calculated it to be 106 calories, ended up getting a commercial kitchen that he rented. And by 16 years old, Khalid had sold 36,000 cookies.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. He has written me several letters along the way. Most recently now he's in college. And actually I have one here. I keep it because it matters to me.
Sure.
Here is the latest letter. I have many along, and some are in the book. This is most recent. It says, I don't think your book does you or Mr. Phil, my co-mentor, justice. The business success is merely one of the dimensions of the impact you've had on me and my future. Your mentoring has provided a lot more than business training. You have provided me with life skills and lessons that never escape my mind, and for that I will remain forever grateful. I hope your book inspires altruism in others and motivates them to lend young people a hand. Not only does it provide young people with guidance they need, but it inspires them to return the favor to the next generation and created a much-needed, never-ending cycle of friendship and support.
Beautiful. That must feel pretty damn good.
That's amazing. Like, if you talk about return on investment, I don't think there can be a better one.
No, that's pretty amazing. And in the book you talk a lot about the importance of the mentor-mentee relationship. So let's look at it from both sides for a moment. How can a potential mentee find the right mentor? And how can the right mentor find the right mentee? Because oftentimes I think we're put with people saying, well, why don't you mentor this person? Or put with person, let this person mentor you. And sometimes it's not a match. And sometimes it's actually, I think that those relationships can often be destructive just as much as empowering. How do we find the right person for the right, whether it's being the mentor or the mentee?
I can't really answer you on that. In the back of the book, I have created a whole glossary, first based on your skill. The big, huge difference in what the book describes is, and we need to talk about this somewhere in here, is what I'm calling project-based mentoring. Mm-hmm. The entrepreneurship piece worked for me, Patty, because that's my background.
Right.
I understand and believe strongly. I mean, I have a huge belief that kids do not learn to create and write a plan and execute to a plan. And I think that is an enormous learning curve. But also, if it's project-based, it will create a natural dynamic in a mentor-mentee relationship. It's not as much social and emotional learning as it is working to a task. Mm-hmm. And the task is an assignment by the teacher. So that's the formula for project-based mentoring. And in the back of the book, it guides science, technology, IT, journalism, culinary, and to a nonprofit, potentially, that specializes in those arenas, and or to go to a school, a community college, a high school, and find a course that's project-based, mm-hmm. where you can integrate with a student based on the subject matter first. So finding the right actual student, I work with all 30. I work with a lot of students.
Right.
And I see them repeatedly. I probably go 15 times a semester. So maybe 30 times a year, but I rotate around or I talk to the whole group.
Yeah.
So those are the details you have to be a little resourceful with. I'm not certain how to do it in reverse. That's not my sort of experience, is working your way upward. But I've read about it. It is something in the mentor organization. They talk about reverse mentoring.
Well, this is the thing with the cultural change and generational change, is that, in my generation, there was only one way to mentor, and that was mentor down. So I'm in the position of authority, you're coming up, I'm going to mentor you. What we now know with millennials and what is already beginning with Gen Z is the need to mentor up, down, and sideways. So peer mentoring, but mentoring the people you are actually leading and actually having them mentor you in their areas. And what I love about that is this concept that we may have our area of expertise and even experience, but that the person we're mentoring probably has something to offer us too. And equalizing that mentorship from cross mentoring, I think, is a very powerful way. And I think it's one of the problems with many people who've been in mentoring roles is that it becomes dictatorial, and I know better than you, so you've got to do as I say. And then we're back in the same problem again. We've started that same cycle of the supreme authority telling you what to do.
So I'd like to respond with two things. The first is this concept of project-based mentoring, which I have spent a whole chapter on it. I think that can work in an internship, in an apprenticeship, and in a mentor relationship.
Okay.
I think the idea of putting a project in the middle of that dynamic fosters better learning.
Right.
And I'm going to share with you several sort of scenarios that characterize what I feel is a productive mentoring relationship.
Please do.
And I think this is unique to mentoring. Before I begin them, I want to say this, exactly what you just said. So much of us in our adult dialogue come to sharing who we are and how great we are. You go to a cocktail party and you talk about all your accomplishments. I have my podcast and I have my radio show and I have my books. Kids don't relate to that.
No.
Kids relate to your difficulty and your pain. And they ask the most beautiful questions, like, weren't you scared of failure? How did you know you could do that? They're very simple questions. So before I even tell you about the mentor relationship, the first thing is you've got to check your success at the door.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just going to go through a couple of these. By making yourself accessible and vulnerable, but you also represent success. Just by being there, you're saying to your mentee, if I did it through all these bumps in the road, you can too. That gives them access to success. You become available to them. They can envision sort of a place B that they might not have envisioned before you.
Right.
Two, I'm here, you can count on me, and I'll be back. So you're demonstrating a sense of reliability and that you do what you say. And these are all just what you're living and being. But by doing these things, you're giving messages. The third thing is, here's how. Now you try.
Mm-hmm.
So you might say, and if you're conducting an interview, this is something that's worked for me. You might try this. And that's the beginning of skills development. Fourth, I would say, you're playing the devil's advocate. You're giving back, honest dialogue and probing questions But sometimes for a kid, that's the first kind of adult dynamic that has been respectful and honest. And they can respond and disagree. So it's a new form of a relationship. The last one I will say is this. I never open a dialogue with a student, my first introduction to them, or with a mentee, without saying this. Look, I'm not your judge. I'm not grading you. I'm not your boss. I'm not your teacher, and I'm not your parent. I am what you would call a consultant to you around your ideas. This is big.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to make suggestions to you, but you can reject them. This is your project. This is your baby. We can discuss strategies, but ultimately it's up to you. So I believe that begins to teach leadership, collaboration, ownership. It's giving over authority. So I think all of those subliminal messages by your behavior teach ownership and leadership.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, integrity is the behavior, not the words.
Exactly.
And I think that, as I said, I think there's two, what I liked about your book, Patty, about what you're talking about, is that this is not mentorship in the way that it was. And that's what I like about it, in that it's not lofty. It's not on a mountaintop. It is, boots on the ground, sleeves rolled up together, but I'm not in charge as the mentor. I'm not in charge. I'm simply there to guide, and you are free to dismiss that,
right.
And there may even be some friction in that, but it's okay because it's your project and you've got to decide. And as the mentor, you have to decide, am I okay with this? Does this work for me too? But
right.
That mutual space there I think is a very different way of looking at mentorship. Now, you mentioned something in there that I know it's not entirely on subject, but you talked about internships. And the internships, I think that, to me, I've said this many times actually from the platform, that I think that if somebody asks me today, do you think I should go to university? I've been asked, and my answer is, I don't believe you should. It's my opinion. I think that if there is a company out there doing what it is you want to do, I think you're better spending that education money going and asking for an internship and keeping yourself financially alive for that period of time so that you get the kind of experience where, I'm not talking about you running around making cups of coffee all day long, but where you will actually get mentored. What are your thoughts on that?
It depends if the company is receptive,
of course,
and in an education mode. And I can tell you there's a lot of education talk right now about co-mingling, about diversifying education to be more experiential, to include internships as part of an education experience.
Yeah.
So that as I can tell you, Gallup, who wrote my foreword, did a huge, largest representative study of its kind called Great Jobs, Great Lives. And they discovered, they interviewed 1 million people, educators, administrators, students, graduates, companies. Students are twice as likely to have successful work lives if they have the one-on-one attention of an adult, be it a mentor or a professor, and if they apply their learning to a long-term project or an internship. They suggest that.
Right.
Both. They suggest both.
Yes.
So then if you're a company and you have an intern, the question is, how do you do that? I've just written another paper on sort of 4 or 5 different scenarios of companies working with educators That's sort of a new model.
Beautiful.
Like Accenture. This is so cool. They take on for 2 months maybe 40 kids, and they invite them to come be consultants with their consultants.
Fabulous.
Like one example was they went to the District of Columbia Public Schools, DCPS, District of Columbia Public Schools. And one of their problems for the school was, how do we get numbers of people that want to attend next year? We're not capturing that data well enough. So they tell their client that they're bringing interns with them.
Mm-hmm.
So the interns are part of the questioning, the gathering of the data, the collaboration back at the office of understanding what kinds of ideas we could come up with to help the school,
right,
to help prepare with the presentation back to the client. So they're seeing the whole cycle, and they're part of it. Now, it's not their project,
no,
but that's a very interesting formula of internship.
It's amazing.
And the kids, I happened to attend the final sort of internship end where the kids stood up and talked about what they took away.
Yeah.
Oh, and my God, it blew me away. One of the kids said, you know the difference between school and work? At school, all you do is get a grade. At work, you worry about making people happy. He says, I much prefer the latter.
That's interesting, eh?
Isn't that interesting?
No, I know that from the stuff in the book, that big companies like Ernst & Young, like Accenture you just mentioned, MasterCard, have taken on what you're putting forward. How are these big organizations leading the way, and what is it that smaller companies can take from them? Because, you know, I would suggest that it seems in many ways, depending on your point of view, it could seem like being a big company like EY or Accenture or MasterCard, it's a big risk to take this on. And it could seem on the other way, well, it's no big risk for them because they're so big. And for us, as a smaller company who are in the 5 million, 10 million, 100 million, I don't know, it's a bit of a risk for us. How are these big companies leading the way, and what can smaller companies learn from them?
The biggest surprise to me in doing the book is the research of interviewing these companies. And I continue to try to do this in my blogs. It blows my mind the takeaways for them in doing this good work, okay? So I can give you reasons why first, and then at a modified version, smaller companies can pull from this what they choose.
Sure.
So here's just a few examples. First of all, the pipeline. Just like we opened with, the skills gap.
Right.
People like Accenture, they cannot find the employees they want. So they're willing, it's worth it to them to invest in building name recognition and skills because that's building their pipeline. That's the number one reason many of these consulting, finance, science, IT companies do that. 2, millennials. They really don't want to work for companies that aren't doing some good work.
Absolutely.
They would rather, if they had a choice and they looked you up on your website and see that one company is doing mentorship, they'd rather go there than go to a company that's doing nothing.
Right.
I've heard that from Howard Schultz himself. When he was at that Ideas Festival. Also, millennials might not have that opportunity themselves. So they become beholden to a company for putting them in a classroom. It enriches the culture because they come back and they feel like I have purpose. My company cares about my community. It brings a sort of an open heart back to the culture.
Nice.
many HR people, I've just written another piece on this stuff. It teaches leadership skills. When you sit with a kid, first of all, they're looking up to you. You have to learn patience. You have to learn humility. You have to learn how to talk at a simple level. You want to live up to what these kids are expecting of you. Mm-hmm. And it's different with a younger generation. You become more of a leader in practice.
Yes.
You have to learn how to speak and speak on your feet. And if you're shy and reticent, it's a trial time to begin to do that. Mm-hmm. So a lot of companies use that for training. It helps magnificently. Ernst & Young said this with employee relations. You can send in a CEO or a vice president with a mid-level manager, and they're going into an inner-city school or a community college. I tell you, they leave that classroom, they have a whole new relationship. It brings them together in a new way. And lastly, I'll just say this. It creates a loyalty. People that work in a company that does this want to stay. They don't want to leave. I'll tell you one other quick little story. This kind of blew my mind. I met a fellow that built up the entire volunteer program for Pfizer. He took it from maybe $9 million a year to $100 million a year. He built it for about 10 years. And this was his story. Pfizer was in two main locations when it began, Connecticut and England. Mm-hmm. And it was a faceless company.
Yep.
People were not happy when they moved into town. And some of the scientists volunteered of their own volition. This started of their own volition in the 40s, going into science classrooms in the towns and helping kids. By hook or by crook, and this is like good PR, it ended up growing. But the same families that go to school go to the doctor's office that buys drugs and goes to the pharmacy that buys drugs. So in a roundabout, circuitous way, it actually helped sales.
Yes.
Because no longer was it a faceless company. I'm sorry I'm long-winded. I've done so much research. But smaller companies can do it at a smaller scale.
Right.
I brought in companies to mentor with me. I usually bring them in first with me to talk to a class, to share their experience, to meet with a student one-on-one with me. And then they might begin by pairing up with one nonprofit who's in a school and putting one or two people together to do that. Then it might grow. There's lots of room for creativity, how it can be deployed and how it's sort of beneficial for both sides. But it's good to stick your toe in and begin.
At least make a start. So what do you,
exactly.
As I said, there's an old framework of mentorship. There's an old framework of being mentored. What would you say is, from your research, what is the biggest mistake people make in mentoring? What is the thing that you constantly see, like, I wish they would not do that? That is not mentoring.
I think it's not about you. It's not about sharing everything you know about you, and your greatness. That's the biggest thing I have to say is check yourself at the door. This is about listening. This is about coming to a place where your mentee is, not where you are.
That's very good. That's a great distinction that I think we all need to remember is, it's easy to get, it's not about me, it's about them. But it's a whole other level to get that it's not about me trying to get them up to my level, but rather me going to their level first. And I think that's a powerful and important distinction. So let's flip it. What do you think is the biggest mistake mentees make when working with a mentor or looking for a mentor?
I think they have to know that this time is valued and that it should be appreciated. In the model that I developed, I required a letter of appreciation. It was required. Like, I feel bad for all the teachers that don't get letters for how much effort and time they put in.
Very good point.
I required this as part of closure. And the letters tell me so much of what the kids are receiving. So I think the appreciation is really important, and I don't know how you teach that except by suggesting they stop and think,
right,
and pause. But I mean, I will tell you, I have a letter from one kid. This like blew my mind, and I didn't even know. She was like in the back of the class. She said she had two things she took away. She said, "I can't believe you came to our class where we are African American and looked down upon and expected to fail. Thank you for not looking at us that way."
Wow.
She said, "Thank you for teaching me a whole new set of skills in business that I was completely unaware of before." And she said, "I have a whole new view of the world and the kindness of strangers."
Oh, now that's pretty powerful. That's got to warm your heart and lift your spirits.
It does. So, I mean, I don't know. She happened to have been more articulate in her letter, but that she could open up to the fact that I don't look like her, but still be appreciative and have a whole other view of that other world is a big thing. And that she might have changed her self-narrative, that she's no longer viewed as expected to fail is even a bigger thing.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And one of the questions I like to ask is, and it's very apropos here in the context of mentorship, is none of us are there. There's a process and nobody's ever done. What was something that you used to do that you probably thought was good, that you now know was detrimental and that you had to change it, and what changed it? So what was it you used to do that you probably did with all good intention, that you discovered was not good, maybe even destructive, and that you had to change it?
You mean when I'm mentoring or just in everything?
Yeah, across the board, wherever it shows up for you.
Well, certainly what I've learned in the classroom is the lecture environment is out. The more you can be integrating and involving and experiential, it's great fun to be innovative and to come up with things that will get kids excited and let them experience what you're saying as opposed to just telling them.
Right.
So that's a kind of a really interesting shift for me, is to learn how to create an experience as opposed to just talking about an experience. That would be a big shift, I guess.
That's very cool. So tell us, who is a leader you admire? Who's a leader you look up to and say, this leader's doing it right?
This leader is doing it right. Well, I was blown away by that Astro Teller. I was blown away by him because he creates this dynamic that everybody's engaged and everybody counts and no idea is bad. And I love that. That I feel has to be more ever present. So he really, and he's available on TED Talks, Astro Teller. Look him up. He blew me away. I know. Here's another one. I'm sorry. I just took a 3-day class on Leonardo da Vinci.
Oh, yeah?
He is not a leader. He's a thought leader.
Well, I think he was a leader in many, many ways. Yeah.
Oh my God. He's the biggest thing about him is he's a leader in curiosity. I've gotten to know Walter Isaacson, and I attended this class that he was part of, and he had experts from all over the world on sciences and arts and sort of building dynamics. Many kinds of disciplines were present, and the idea that he was the very first man to cut open a body, a cadaver, and see how muscles are built and designed that inform his art, or how light reflects out of your eye and comes out, and how that affects lighting it just blew my mind. So those were my 2 latest.
Very cool. So as we finish up here, I want to ask you this question. What is the most practical thing that you hope a leader watching us, listening to us, will take away from what you've shared today? What is the thing you want them to say, I'm going to put this in action today?
I would hope that they might go talk to an educational institution near where they're geographically located, and maybe begin a dialogue of what their needs are. Like, be self-aware of where you're heading in the next 10 years. Where is technology heading, and what are the characteristics you look for in job applicants? I so sad that the New York Times has taken away the corner office article. I always read that piece every Sunday on how CEOs hire. And everybody has their specialties of things they look at. So be aware of what your needs are and the characteristics, and communicate it. And hopefully we can begin a dialogue. I'm actually talking at the governor level, at the Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Education, Workforce Development. This is much bigger than just a company to a school. This is community-wide. It's sort of the sustainability of generations to keep filling our pipeline and keep America competitive. This is not
very interesting. And I think it would be a powerful thing to set up something that would be some version of a town hall between education and corporations, because the disconnect between the two of them is going to massively impact business here is already and will continue to, and education in the form that it's in is a dinosaur that is completely outdated until we make that shift. And places like the Khan Institute are showing that very, very well. It's time for change. I want to really thank you for joining us, Patty. Thank you for all that you've shared with us. It's been great. Please tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you and all of your resources.
Great. I have a website, www.teachtowork, TEACHTOWORK.com.
Which, of course, is the title of Patty's book, Teach to Work. Make sure you get that.
There's lots of information in there. I'll just share this. Kind of opens with why mentor, with some history of case studies on 5 companies, individual mentors, and then kind of what's in it for the student. It rolls into a sort of in-depth look at what is project-based mentoring. And then really the book is written to maybe a reticent mentor on really how to begin and best practices.
Fabulous.
And the last piece I mentioned is, okay, now that you know how to do it, where are you going to do it? So it's why, how, and where.
Fabulous.
So I'm hoping it will light a fire, and let's, Doug, maybe you and I should host this town hall.
Yeah, that would be a very good idea. Let's
get
it
that
happening.
going.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you again, Patty. It's been great having you here. Hope you'll stay with us to the end, and we want to say thank you to you, and we also want to say thank you to our dear listeners and viewers. Thank you for joining us on the show today, and I hope that you do take what you've learned today and maybe get out there and mentor a little bit, or at least consider opening up yourself and maybe even your organization to do so. And remember, the research consistently shows that one of the biggest challenges facing even the most successful companies is somewhat counterintuitive, in that these fast-growing companies often hit the point where they realize they're spending an absolute fortune attracting, training, and developing talent, and then having them leave them at just an alarming rate. So if you're sick of investing in training and developing your talent, only to have them leave you before you get your ROI, then reach out to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into your purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, providing you with the concrete soft skills to get you and your organization to the top and keep you there. Why? Well, because you can't outsource authenticity. Remember also to stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need a www, just matrix.fullmontyleadership.com, and get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. It's valued at $197. You get it absolutely free for being a regular viewer listener to us. And remember, get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. Till next time, this is Dov Baron of fullmontyleadership.com saying, stay curious, my friend, stay curious about how you can mentor the next level of talent coming your way. Till next time, Dov Baron, I'm out.